Good evening, everybody. It's a huge pleasure to see you all. I understand we have at least 100 people with us tonight, and that goes to show, Leila, what a pole you are, how much people want to listen to you.
Well, it goes to show, Vera, what a movement you built. So thanks all for being here.
Well, it's really a great pleasure to have you with us tonight, Leila. I want to introduce you as my colleague and my friend. We have known each other for some time now because we were both on the leadership program and people thought you need more women in parliament, and hey ho, here we are. We have got now a majority of women in parliament. There is there's a great Russian enthusiasm when you first get elected. We both got elected in 2017. And we sort of loved it, didn't we? It was just fantastic, that last parliament. It's a bit more difficult now. And here you are, you're going to stand for the leadership of the Liberal Democrats. That's a massive challenge, a massive opportunity. Over to you with your pitch.
Well, firstly, thank you so much, Vera, and welcome everybody. Hello, it's wonderful to see you. The reason why I'm dressed in green is entirely by coincidence. We do have a green screen, but I haven't got it to work yet in time for the hustings that are starting this weekend. And I happen to wake up and wear a green top. So I don't normally dress around like Kermit the Frog, but that seems to be where we've started today. And I just want to say an enormous thank you. Wow, we have 100 people on this call. This is amazing. What I thought I'd do is just spend just a few moments telling you about where I think the party should be going and why I hope that you'll consider backing me for leadership at this time. But then we're going to go very quickly to questions, because these kinds of sessions are a brilliant time to hear from you what you care about in the party at the moment. And Vera's going to start with a few, and then afterwards we're going to take questions from the floor. So I can already see some in the chat. Do get them ready. So my background is I entered politics indeed in 2017. I was a maths and physics teacher until that point. And in fact, most of my career does lie outside of Parliament, but I see that as a good thing at a time when a lot of people in the country right now don't really think that politicians listen to them, that the parliamentary system works for them. And actually, as Liberal Democrats, we have always been a little bit of the outsider party, the party that wants to change the system. And I personally take great pride in being someone who has not spent their whole career inside that place. My background is very international. My father was a classic tale of British social mobility, actually, was the first in his family to go to university from a very working class background, born in Chelmsford, but actually grew up in Glossop in Derbyshire. My mother is Palestinian, and her family moved from Jericho in Palestine at the time to Jordan, and then after that settled in Greece. My parents met whilst they were doing their education here in the UK, and at 1 year old I moved with them. Obviously I didn't move us, my father did, to Brussels to join the European Commission. And so when I say that I am European to my core, that goes so far as to even be true that my very first flag that I drew was a European flag. We went round the different countries that my father was posted in. We went to Ethiopia when I was 5 in the late 80s. So some of you might remember Live Aid from that time. We went to actually from there to Greece very briefly, but then also to Jamaica, to Jordan, in these places where I was a child. What I had was a really strong sense of fairness and justice, and recognizing that the role of the European Union was to spread the values of peace and trade, and that when countries trade together, they are far more likely to understand each other. And that diversity of my upbringing then I think has a direct link into how I see politics today. But actually, I have to say, when I was a child, I wasn't that into politics at all. I was into physics. I was much more interested in other things that we all have in common. You know, in the end, we are all stardust, are we not? And so I did physics at Imperial College. And I then went on to become a teacher. And it was through my experience as a teacher that I decided to join a political party. And I joined ours because we were the best in terms of what the policy was compared to the research that I was doing at the time. And I'm proud to now be Shadow Education Secretary for our party. But why is it that I want to be leader? What's the pitch there? Well, 3 years on from Brexit, where I helped to launch the People's Vote, where we got used to what it was like post-coalition, that devastating election in 2015, where my seat in Oxford Western Abingdon went from a marginal of 167 votes against the Tories to way behind. We needed to recover, and we just haven't. If you look at the last election, we ended that at 12%. We're now at 6%. Guys, we need to change. We need to move forwards. And my pitch is all about renewal. It's about renewing the party from the place we are now, carrying through the traditions of the past, but recognizing where we've gone wrong, and recognizing that the two big things that the electorate want from us is trust and credibility. Trust. We win back trust by listening to people in all regions and nations in our United Kingdom. And at the end of that election, I was devastated. I'm sure many of you were as well. And I went door knocking, and I actually did not go to London and the Southeast. I went to Yorkshire, and I went to Leeds, and I went to Sheffield. I then went to Devon and Cornwall. I went to Romsey. I went to Wales, and I was about to go to Scotland, but then coronavirus intervened. And my point is, I recognize that this party needs to be a party that is much more one that lives its values, that is bottom up, and that if we are going to campaign, it needs to be on a broad message that can bring voters from all sides to us, which is what I did in 2017, overturning in one go a nearly 10,000 Tory majority. And you do that not by tacking one way or another. Actually, what you do is you have a strident liberal message, a radical liberal message even, where we are strong on public services, where on those issues of the economy, we do fight from the centre left. And on that, Wera and I absolutely agreed. But I'm sure what we're also agreed is that we recognise that that bottom-up localism is very much at the heart of who we are as liberals, and that the way that you achieve great public services and the way you achieve real democracy is to devolve power to that individual. This message is currently misunderstood or not understood at all by the electorate, and we need to revive it. And so where we are now, we need to change. We need to move forwards. We need to win again. And that's what I offer as leader, is at renewal, is a chance for the electorate to look at us again. And my success as a leader, for me, would be determined by, if by the time we get to the next election, you knock on a door and you ask someone, what do the Lib Dem stand for? Who are they? That they'll have that answer. So back to you, Wera, but thank you again for inviting me. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. So before we continue, can I remind everybody that this meeting is being recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, please put that in the chat as well. Secondly, can I ask you to make sure that you're muted during this meeting, because I can already hear a little bit of background noise and it makes it more difficult to follow. So please, while you're not speaking, please mute yourself. If you have a question, please put it in the chat, and I will ask you to unmute yourself and asking your question. So these are the three things to remember. It's going to be recorded. Please mute yourself. If you want to ask a question, put it in the chat, and I will call you when it is your time to ask your question. I hope we get through as many questions as possible. And the quicker the question, the more questions we can get in. And of course, Leila, you will remember to also give us relatively short answers.
I will try my best.
So here I go to sort of get everybody in the mood. You were a teacher, I was a teacher too. So that's another thing that brings us together. If you were the education secretary, you are a spokesperson currently in the Lib Dems, but if you were the secretary for education, what would be the one and first thing that you want to change?
It's a great question, one I think about a lot, because as I've described, I went into politics because I care so deeply about giving every child in this country the best possible start in life, and recognize that actually this rich country still doesn't manage to do that, because we have enormous inequalities. We have cities with, you know, huge amounts of deprivation, and it's not evenly spread across the regions and nations either. And if there's something that really jars with my own sense of self and politics, is that actually what makes me a liberal is I don't care what your background is. I don't care if you come from a rich family or a poor family, if you have a different color skin, if you have a different sexuality. None of this should matter. It's the content of your character and your own potential that should be the only thing that matters in how far you get in life. And that's just not the case in this country. So what's the very first thing that I would change? Well, I would aim to change a lot about the education system. At the moment, we've got a really narrow track education system that really focuses on exams. I want an education system that makes children world ready, not just exam ready. But your question was about the very first thing I change. And that is, I would make sure that teachers up and down this country were given the best possible training, the best possible support, and then to give them more autonomy in how they deliver a curriculum. Because right now, there is a very overbearing curriculum that really doesn't respond to the individual needs of the child. And I don't know about you, but when I went through my PGCE, there was a real sense of, you know, these are the things that you must teach them with very little scope for creativity, which meant that you couldn't draw out those children who maybe didn't quite get it or wanted to think in a slightly different way. You can do this, but you need a lot of training and support for teachers to do it. So I trust teachers, but we need to give them much more continued professional development. That would be the first thing. But believe me, that would be the first thing in a lot of things that I intend to change about the education system.
And indeed, having gone through teacher training relatively recently, I have to admit I went to good teacher training, but I think the continuous support of teachers is a very important thing. And often teachers these days feel threatened and not comfortable, or, you know, they're always being watched by Ofsted and by figures and statistics. And they don't feel, the teachers themselves don't feel that they can develop their own potential as fantastic teachers. So, you know, I'm with you there, Leila. Train the teachers. My next question, net zero. I'm the spokesperson for the climate emergency. I campaign on green issues, and I think it's so important we get to net zero. Our Lib Dem target is 2045, but now that we've had COVID, we've seen that so many things can suddenly change if we're really forced to change. Do you think we could actually have an ambition to bring our net zero target as Liberal Democrats further down to something like 2040? Is that a possibility? Have you been thinking about it? Can we do it?
Yeah, so I have been thinking, and actually I credit you, Vera, because the first time I heard of doing that was when you and I did the Green Lib Dems hustings together. And I said at the time I was very sympathetic to that view. And I think what I would say is, I mean, it is up to the party to make the policy. So I think it's very important that any leader of our party does recognize that that's the case. And what I want to do as leader is to really challenge the party on these kinds of issues, to capture that sense of urgency, because that's the bit that we need to do now. And I don't know about you, but I felt, whilst we've got brilliant policy, which you of course helped to create, and all credit to you and the Federal Policy Committee and Green Lib Dems and others who are all part of that process. One of the things that I feel we got lost in the last election is that often our policies are very Goldilocks. You know, on the one hand, you had a Labour Party that seemed to be outflanking us on this. On the other, you had the Tories who are also talking about it. You had the Greens who are competing for space. And what I would put to you is that actually, I'm not sure necessarily that the changing of the policy positions matters as much at this time in politics as the framing, the emotional framing of these policies. And so I think looking at, do we change it from 2045 to 2040 is a great way of capturing that urgency. But actually, that's the point I want to make. And when in that last parliament, we were just absolutely consumed by Brexit. As an example of that urgency, you know, the Fridays for Future strikes, and I remember raising this and saying, come on, guys, we need to, as a party, get behind this. And I went to the first one here in Oxford, and I had 2,000 young people surrounded by placards saying that They wanted change, they wanted to be heard, and that this was the biggest issue facing the planet. And we, as politicians and a political class, they didn't feel got it. And I promised them on that day that I would go away and do something about it. And I called that first debate on the floor of the House in 2.5 years on climate change. We then brought Greta Thunberg to Parliament, and us as a party have been leading on this from the front. So let's continue to do that. I would like us to be the party that young people and anyone who cares deeply about the climate emergency look at us at the next election and go, do you know what? They get it. COVID-19 was frankly a dress rehearsal for what we are going to face if we don't get a grip from this climate emergency. And the last thing I'll say is actually I think COVID-19 presents an opportunity to supercharge the changes that we need to make around making sure that homes are zero carbon, that we change and increase the amount of energy that we have from renewables. But if you look at other ways that we need to change our economy, it's also around education and training. And that we need to help people make better choices. And the other area is really investing in research and innovation, which, you know, I'm in a university town, you're in a university town. My science background really loves the fact that as a party, we have always been forwards looking in terms of technology. And we really now as a country need to invest in those future technologies that are going to help us get over the line and even arguably go beyond carbon zero if we ever can.
Right, thank you, Leila. So I'm going to ask you 2 more questions, but guys, get prepared in the order of Joshua, Stephen Tutel, and Nicholas Collier. I'm going to ask you to come in once I've asked my 2 more questions. So Joshua is the next, about every region, then Stephen Tutel about Palestine, and Nicholas Collier, you're the 3rd person who comes in after me. But let me ask you another question, Leila, on localism. You touched on that. We always pride ourselves as a party of localism, and yet I think we still are too centralized as a party, aren't we? First of all, I mean, I think I don't need to sort of ask you whether you agree. I think we all as a party actually have understood that we have been too centralized and we need to go out into the regions. What is it that you're proposing? And I'm sure Joshua will grill you on this question once he comes in. So what is it really that we need to do?
Well, first of all, yes, we are agreed. I mean, I think the general election review also made it very clear. And one of the things that we absolutely need to do in this election is to give that general election review the mandate it needs to get through the party, because there's a lot in it. And to get it through and to get it through quickly enough to be able to make a big difference to our electoral chances is going to be a lot of effort on the part of the party. But it's the right thing to do because we have to change. One of the things that I have always said is that our success as a party is built off the back of our local campaigning. And people often ask, you know, how did we do it here in Oxford, where we overturned 10,000 and then more recently got the best result in this seat's history against a Tory who was, by the way, quite popular. You know, it wasn't a case that I had a useless Tory MP. She was quite popular. She was a minister. People liked her here. And the way that we did it was we built it off the back of building our councillor base, of fighting hard at every opportunity where we could, campaigning all year round, and having a strategic plan where we realised that actually having an MP is not just the be-all and end-all. You build from the bottom up. Now, the problem I have with the party is that we claim to be a bottom-up party, but the way that we're structured and the way that we operate is very top down. And those of you who were in seats that weren't perhaps target seats at the last election will remember, I'm sure, leaflets dropping through the door that actually turned people off the Liberal Democrats, that had no bearing on what you were doing at a local level, and where when you raised the alarm, it wasn't heard anywhere. There wasn't that natural feedback loop so that you could be in charge of your campaigning, and that is wrong. And so what we need to do, in my view, is to move HQ out of London. I think that's where we start. Well, we move it out of London.
I really think that sounds like a very interesting idea, and I wonder whether we have the guts to do it. I have one last question to you, and then it's really over to our very big audience. My last question is about Progressive Alliance. You call yourself a social liberal. And we've all understood we need to move forward and do something different from the last 10 years of what we have done as a party. So I personally have talked about a Progressive Alliance. You might want to formulate it a little bit differently, but I mean, I think without a Progressive Alliance, it will be very difficult to get the Tories out. So how would you think that could work, a Progressive Alliance, in your words?
Yeah. So we are absolutely agreed, I hope, that the person that we need to take down at the next election is Boris Johnson and the Tories. These Tories who have completely botched up Brexit, who have completely botched up coronavirus. Yesterday, I became the chair of the party parliamentary group on coronavirus in the House. And the purpose of the group is to work cross-party to expose this government for the mistakes that it has made. But more important than that, it's not a political endeavor. We're doing it because we want to save lives, because we have one of the worst death rates in the world. And the reason for that is because of Boris Johnson. So we have to hold this man to account, and by hook or by crook, we have to take him out. Now, in the seats where we are competitive against the Tories, and I don't know the personal experience of many people on this call, but I got sick of Labour activists coming in, campaigning against us, saying, you're all yellow Tories, you're all the same, and stopping us from winning seats against the Tories. What we have to achieve is that 92 to 97 strategy that was delivered under Paddy Ashdown. And that was a progressive alliance by another name, where us and Labour recognised that we needed to put down our swords against each other, and that in order to win against the Tories, we had to have a compelling message to be able to tell the electorate of our own, a liberal message, but that we were pragmatic about where we fought and that they were pragmatic about where they fought. And that's exactly how we won here. And it's how I know you've won there too, Wera. In the seats against the Tories that we have captured and held, that's what we do. We create a progressive alliance of voters around us as MPs, but we also peel away lots of votes from the Conservatives, and you have to do both. But it starts with us gaining the trust of the other parties. And I will just say this. If you think about Keir Starmer and the people he has surrounded himself with in his shadow cabinet and everywhere else, most of those people have spent their parliamentary careers fighting either us and the Tories in coalition or the Tories since then. Who are they more likely to work with, me or Ed? And I would posit that because of my experience in the House over the last 3 years, leading on the people's vote, because of my relationships with those people, that relationship between me as leader of the Lib Dems and Keir Starmer as leader of the Labour Party is going to be an absolutely critical relationship. And the question needs to be, who is best placed to get Labour to play ball? And I believe that's me.
Thank you, Leila. So we are going off to you now. The first person who wants to ask a question is Joshua. Joshua, are you there? Can you unmute yourself?
Hello. Yeah, I'm here.
Hello, Joshua.
Yeah, thanks, Wera and Leila, for hosting these. First, before we get my question, my fiance's just got off as a teacher and got off a CPD course, and if we could talk up Kirsty Williams's great success about the curriculum in Wales, the better, because I've never heard such praise about a curriculum before, which was great. But I'm going to talk about success in every region. Now, Leila, you were in a chat yesterday, and I don't think you meant it, but the one of the two regions you didn't mention in the whole of the UK was the Midlands. Now, most people who are up north forget about, you know, thinking that anything below Crewe is the south, and anyone in the south, anywhere above Watford is the north, and everyone forgets about out the Midlands. Now, in the West Midlands, we had one target seat in 2019, which was hilarious, being Warwick and Leamington, and we came a very dismal 3rd place. Now, what is your plans to make sure we win in every region?
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, actually, it's true. I didn't, and actually, I should have done, because of all the other regions in the UK that I probably visited the most in that period. It was the Midlands, and it was Warwick, because actually they're quite close. We're only about 45 minutes up the road from each other, and maybe that's why I just feel like it's quite close. It's my backyard. I have to say, what we have to learn from the election just gone is that unless you build from the bottom up in terms of our organisers, in terms of making sure that we've got a strong local government base, unless we are building slowly and surely over time, we can't then expect a freebie as Lib Dems. It just doesn't exist. And so to me, the lesson that we need to learn from the last election is we need to be quite pragmatic about where we target. But secondly, that those seats aren't going to grow unless we put significant resources into them. And so what do I mean by resourcing? Well, I hope as a teacher, you'll agree with me, the best way to get anyone to do something well is to teach them, is to empower them, is to give them the training. And if you think back to, and I don't know how long people on this call have been a member, but I joined in 2007. And actually at that time, the party was brilliant at training. It did a lot of it. Wera and I were on the same training program for candidates. And since then, ALDC do a brilliant job. And my own view is that we need to enable ALDC to do a lot more of what it does. But we need to build up that training and build up that capacity in our party. We are 120,000 volunteers. And if we were a business, it would be a ridiculous thing how little we train and how much we do to our human infrastructure. So that's where I'd start. And the second thing that I would do is to make sure that we had devolved campaigning arms. You know, if you think about it, campaigning hubs around the country. That's what I mean about I would love to see HQ move out of London. Some bits of it will probably have to stay, the press team and others. I see no reason in a post-COVID world why we shouldn't be having far more organisers based around the country so that we can have a strategic plan for how to move these seats forward. And I will say, I don't want to be a leader for just a few years. We're looking right now at electing our 5th leader in as many years. That's no way to run an organisation. What we need to do is to have some stability. And I want to be a leader for the next 5 to 10 years. I'm not just thinking about the next election. I'm already thinking about the one after that. So it's not just a case of brutally targeting only those places we can win, because then after that, what do? We have to have a broad message and a strategy that is going to deliver seats over that medium to long term, not just the short term.
Thank you, Leila. I can still hear some background noises from everybody, and I have to be a bit of a teacher here. Can you make sure you can mute yourself, because it makes it so much more difficult to listen to everybody. So please check whether you're muted. Can I now come to Stephen? Stephen, you want to ask a question on Palestine, and I'm sure, Leila, you're very well prepared to be asked questions on Palestine. Stephen, over to you. Are you there?
I am. Thank you for inviting me to ask a question, and thank you. I mean, I really respect you both as teachers, because my mother was a science teacher. I know how hard she worked. My question is this. There are many of us who care about the international justice, or actually lack of international justice around the world, and the Israeli-Palestine situation is one of those. Those of us who stand up for it sometimes get challenged because we're not born there. And yet it's an important issue that we all need to share and talk about, because if we don't raise it, if we don't address it... Stephen,
can I just interrupt you? Some people are saying we can't hear you. Can you go a little bit closer to your microphone? So can you ask the question so we can hear it all?
Yeah, well, my question is this. With your ancestry being in Palestine, does that give you a greater opportunity to speak on issues of social and international injustice because you know from your own family's background what it's really like.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah. So bluntly, I mean, of course, I mean, I'm the first MP of Palestinian heritage. I mean, I was born in Hammersmith. I've only got a British passport. And, you know, I think one of the things that makes me very sad is that even if I wanted a Palestinian passport, I couldn't get one. It's not open to me to get one. And so the dimension that I bring to the debate, and actually it's a dimension that I bring to a lot of my politics, is I bring a humanness to it. I talk about my own personal story, my family's story. We are a Christian family from Jerusalem. My great grandfather wrote diaries where he chronicled the life that he led in the early 1900s, when actually the British Mandate came and freed them from the Ottoman Empire. And he spoke about a time when there just weren't the divides that we see now. His best friends were Muslims and Jews, and it just didn't matter the background of those peoples. They were best friends. And that is such a way away from the perception of how it is on the ground. I mean, in reality, of course, that still happens to an extent, but the politics of it has now got to such an extent that it is an us versus them. And we've recently seen, in terms of annexation, a really strongman government come in, led by Netanyahu, who is responsible for breaking international law if he then enacts annexation. And I have been strident in calling it out. And you can be strident about calling out the Israeli government and the leaders in that government without being anti-Semitic. And I've done it over and over again. And I have been, you know, chronicled in places like the Jewish Chronicle for standing up against anti-Semitism and yet being able to robustly defend the two-state solution. And I can do that because of my background. And I do it sensitively because I understand the complexities of the issue. But I would also point out my international background. My father was an ambassador for most of his career. I lived in countries that had immense difficulties, where social justice was at the heart of what we were trying to change. You know, when I was a child, would go and visit an aid project where it was the very first tap that existed in that village. And I would meet children my own age and we would play. But I would always be aware that actually these enormous discrepancies in our lives existed. And whilst I would go back to a warm home, actually that's not what they had. And so that sense of social justice and the need to help others, not just those in your backyard in this country, but also others across the world, is very, very strong in my own background. And I think that that perspective as well, having traveled the world and had that exposure to diverse cultures, means that when we as Liberal Democrats are going to face the next international crisis, I bring a depth of experience that actually I don't know very many other politicians that have it. And if you also think about where in the past do we as Lib Dems do well? When is it that we capture the imagination of the British people? It's usually on foreign policy issues. To speak emotionally and competently on international foreign policy should be one of the qualities, in my view, that we are looking for in a leader. Look at Charles for Iraq. You know, look at the stance we took over Brexit. It's those issues that we often get the cut through on. And I feel that I've got the background to be able to do that, not just on Palestine, but on a range of different issues.
I think you're absolutely right. We are a values-based party, aren't we? We do best, and we are an internationalist party. We do best when our values shine through, and we need a leader that really represents and speaks to our values and speaks outside to the people outside about what we are, and we are a values-based party. Now, talking about values, Nicholas, are you ready to ask your question on homelessness? And before you start, can I just say, I've been talking about internationalism and Europe. We've got two people who want to ask a question on Europe. So first Phil and Mark Johnson after Nicholas to ask a question on the EU. But it's first Nicholas on homelessness. Are you there, Nicholas?
I am. Hi, Leila. Hi, Vera.
Hi, Nicholas.
How you doing? Hiya. Yeah, basically on homelessness, you were talking about the Vagrancy Act. Us as a party, as Lib Dems, how can we overcome this problem of homelessness, which the government aren't tackling? They put people in temporary accommodation, and now what's happening is people are actually ending up on the streets. Now you're going to have them being affected by coronavirus. But as Lib Dems, we need to hold this government account on homelessness and on the social care issue as well, where they have not been, they've neglected the care homes. So as Lib Dems, we need to look at those issues, how we can sort those values out in society.
Yeah. Thank you for your question, Nick, because actually I think the way you framed it is exactly how I see it, which is at the core of who we are, for me, is an understanding that we look after each other, you know, at a basic level. And if someone's in need, it's us who lead the charge to help them. And that's actually what's been happening during coronavirus, where we've had Lib Dem councillors, Lib Dem led councils. They have been the ones who have delivered at this time. And we do it because we are compassionate, because we care about those communities and we care about every individual within those communities. So the reason why I picked up the homelessness area as something that I care deeply about is actually, well, partly because it's the right thing to do, but also because in my local constituency in Oxford, we are a magnet for those who are seeking help. And that's what they are. They aren't a burden. They have been failed by society, and I see it as our job to help them. So I've been campaigning to get rid of the Vagrancy Act. So for those who don't know, that is a draconian law where it is actually illegal to be a rough sleeper in this country. And it's so counter to British values that it just should not be on the statute book. And as part of it, I've led a cross-party charge. I've got Crisis and Shelter and others working with me on it. It's a real live issue in a lot of the cities up and down the UK. But what it also allows us to do is to demonstrate those core values that we have as a party, of compassion, of caring for others, of how we need to help them. And so that's why I've chosen it. But actually, I think we need to go further now. And your point around, at this point, there's going to be so many people who are going to be left out on the streets because the Tories just haven't either replaced the funding or don't plan to or aren't doing it properly. Actually, what we need is a homes first approach. And when I took this up, I sat on the Public Accounts Committee for the whole of the last Parliament, and I led the charge on housing and homelessness on the Public Accounts Committee and led the inquiry on that. And what we realised is that this is just a no-brainer, because not only is it the right thing to do, if you give someone a home, in the medium to long term, they actually end up costing the taxpayer less. Because from that point, you can get them the help that they need. You can get them the support that they need, and you can often get them out of that situation. And so it's just the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. And to your point around social care, I mean, that's kind of a whole other massive area. But yes, I mean, we need to sort this out. Norman Lamb actually led the charge on this for many years, and it all comes down to that basic principle. No matter what stage of life you're at, the Liberal Democrats are going to be there for you if you hit on hard times. But the way we're going to do it is by allowing you to decide how best to get out of it. We're not going to top down give you a concrete pathway, not listen to your views, treat you as a number. We're going to treat you as an individual. We're going to treat you with compassion. And that's actually the best way and the most efficient way to get people out of hard times.
Okay, thank you, Leila. So we have got two questions on the EU now, one from Phil and then from Mark. Phil, you first.
Yeah. When the leadership race was announced, I immediately supported Wera because of her position on the EU, a rejoin position, which was very strong. Now, Wera has given her support to you, but I'd like to know what's your position on the EU and rejoining. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Are we going to take them together, Wera, or?
Okay, Mark, and why don't you unmute yourself too and ask your question, Mark?
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Thank you both for the opportunity to meet and talk like this. My question, I mean, Leila, I've heard you say before you support rejoining in principle. That's good. My question, can you see a way to support rejoining within 10 years? So perhaps the European elections in 2029 were back. If so, how would you go about organising that, including cooperation with other parties? And the last part, in terms of the current party policy, would you accept that the idea of the closest possible relationship with Europe, but where we do not have a seat at the table, where we do not have any votes, is in its essence just to be a rule taker? It's to be a vassal state, and that for a democratic party is fundamentally undemocratic. Thanks very much.
No, yeah, thank you, Mark. Well, I hope sort of in the framing of my question, I'll kind of answer both at the same time, which is that, and I hope you know from my background that I've just told you, if I could rejoin the EU tomorrow, I would. That is absolutely where my heart lies. For me, the EU was never just about trade. It was also a sense of identity. And it speaks to how I approach the world, which is that if you have big challenges, the best way to approach it is to gather round all the resources and all the connections you have. And it means working with other countries. And we like to belong to things as Lib Dems. We also have a very concrete position on the union, for example, for the same reason, which is that we are stronger together, and that where we are successful in changing things for the better across the whole world, it's where we are part of these organizations that bring people together. It's a core principle of ours. So yes, do I want to rejoin? Absolutely. As quickly as possible? Yes. Do I think that it's now? No. Because we need to bring the public mindset around, and Mark is doing this on the screen. Is it within 10 years? Well, Mark, if I could do it in 5, I would. But I don't know if we're going to be able to bring public opinion around in time for that. And actually, in reality, that's what we now need to do. The plan to rejoin the European Union has already started. It starts by averting no deal / making sure we don't go off that cliff edge at the end of this year. I mean, it's going to be almost impossible. And I think actually what's probably going to happen is that Boris Johnson is going to hide a very hard Brexit or a no deal Brexit behind COVID-19. And he's going to use the crashing economy as a smokescreen for what he's about to do. But also, I'm already seeing opportunities here in changing public opinion. Because, for example, the Tories promised that they wouldn't lower food standards and that they wouldn't lower environmental standards. And yet, over the last few weeks, what have we seen? It's Liz Truss saying that she would lower food standards and introduce chlorinated chicken into our supermarkets in order to try and secure a much more mediocre deal with the US, as opposed to trying to stay as close to possible to the European Union. And that's just wrong. And what I've been doing is actually working with unlikely bedfellows, the Mail, the Daily Mail newspaper and the Mail on Sunday are helping with this campaign to show people what she's doing. And we're actually campaigning on this together, which is bizarre because you don't really do stuff like this. But I actually get the cut through in the press that allows us to campaign in bizarre places. I delivered, for example, a coronavirus compensation scheme. And I did it by bringing together people across the house and did it in cahoots with the Daily Express newspaper, Anti-Ramona Central. And they worked with me to do it. If we're going to change public opinion, we need a leader who can get the cut through in the press, at all sides of the press, not just the ones who would normally vote for us, but all sides, to change that public opinion towards us. And so, yeah, if I could get us there earlier, I would. But we have to recognize where we are now and to keep making the case for why we want as close a possible union as possible at a time when it's doing like that. And that's going to make people realize that they were wrong. They were wrong to think that it was going to be unicorns and it was going to be great and that they could have it all. And we're going to have to keep holding the government to account. So I hope I've answered.
So, sorry to get in there. Of course, this debate is really getting a lot of people in the chat going. And one of the questions that's been asked again and again Leila, are we going to be brave enough to have redrawn as our key messages, Liberal Democrats, or are we sort of skirting around it and not really want to talk about it? Is it going to be our key message that we say at the heart of what we believe is that we are once again member of the European Union? Will we say that? Will we be brave enough to say that?
I will say it, and I do say it, but I think we need to pick our moment. And with all of these things in politics, it's about picking the right moment to really supercharge that momentum. So I think we need to be canny about how we do this, because I'm intent that we are going to rejoin, but we have to make sure that it is done in a way that actually achieves that aim rather than turns people off. And my concern is that if we say it right now, the very same people that we need to win on side to make the case to are just going to stop listening. They're going to do like this. And actually, coronavirus provides us with an opportunity to reach those parts of the country that we maybe would have lost over the last few years. And I think we can win those people back. I think we can win it by talking around public services. I talk about education, the environment, and the economy. Let's talk about those things over and over and over again. Make the case for a different Britain. And then, once we've earned their trust again, we then go in with messages like that. But if we start there now, my concern, guys, is that it's going to end up counterproductive to the longer term aim. So yes, be brave, but pick your moment.
Excellent. So let's move on from the EU, because we can talk about that all night. But there's still an excellent set of questions in the chat, and I hope we get through them all. But let's just go about the next three. So I've got Jack Bell, who wants to ask about the SNP, and then Andrew Wright about values, and then Dudley about a cooperative mindset across the world. So let's first start with Jack. Jack, are you around? Can we hear you?
Yeah, just unmuted now. Hi, Leila.
Hi, Jack.
I live in Scotland, and for almost 10 years now, Scotland has been dominated by the SNP. There's this belief in Scotland that the SNP are the only party which stands up for Scotland, and they've got a lot of people voting for them. Many who don't necessarily agree with Scottish independence or have been led that way because they think that parties in Westminster totally ignore Scotland. So I was just wondering, as Labour and the Conservatives were in decline in Scotland, I think this is the opportunity to fill the gap in the market and become the main pro-UK party to challenge SNP dominance. And we've got an election next year coming up, so I was just wondering whether, if you became leader, the Federal Party can help the Scottish Party campaign in those elections.
Thank you, Jack. This is an issue of absolute critical strategic value for not just the party, but also the country. And the problem I always had with Brexit, and I think one of the more underused arguments about Brexit, was that we could see that if it went the wrong way, which it has, it was going to fuel even more support for the SNP. And what's interesting about, if you look at the SNP over the last 10 years, they actually dipped a bit before the Brexit referendum, after they'd lost the Indie ref, and then Brexit refueled the movement because suddenly people thought that they were the answer, and they had this very simplistic argument that if you vote for the SNP, then we can leave the UK behind and go and join the EU. Well, it's just not that simple. But what have the SNP done well? Well, actually, you know what they've done well, and you know what we have utterly failed at? And guys, if there's one thing that I want you to take away from today, it's this thought. In current politics, the parties who win are the ones who can make the emotional arguments. And we, for too long, haven't been able to make those emotional arguments across the country in all sorts of different ways, and so have really struggled. Meanwhile, love them or lump them, and for me it's lump them, the Tories and arguably the SNP have got this. They've done it really well. They make the emotional argument to the extent where the facts almost don't matter anymore. Now, I'm not saying we forget about the facts, because that's just not Lib Dem. But when we are campaigning in Scotland, what we need to do, and we should be taking the fight to the SNP, and look at how we held on to our vote there, notwithstanding what happened to Joe, but we won Wendy Chamberlain in North East Fife. We held on to Jamie. We held on to Edinburgh. We held on to Shetland and Orkney. We also now have the list elections coming up. They're critically important, but the SNP are surging. And they're surging because we need to now make that positive case for the union. And it's an emotional argument. And it goes like this. First of all, if you hate Boris Johnson, so do we. If you want to vote for a party that hates Boris Johnson, you have an ally in the Lib Dems. 2, if you believe that the best way of tackling the world's problems is to work with others, then why are you leaving the United Kingdom? Join us in fighting to rejoin the European Union, to change hearts and minds across all 4 families of nations, and you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And the third thing that we really need to be talking about is that economic case, which is that, yes, I am from Oxford, but I care just as deeply about a child getting a great education in Aberdeenshire as I do in Devon and Cornwall, as I might do in Pontypridd in Wales. I believe that we are better when we support each other. And that can be done through localism and federalism, better than cutting up our 4 families of nations and cutting the ties with each other. And so I think there is a really emotional argument that we can make. My job as Westminster leader is to support the Scottish Party in what it's doing. And I know that the party has already identified that we need to make sure that we head off that SNP threat at the next election, but not just because it's the right thing for our party to do, it's because it's the right thing for our country to do.
I absolutely agree. It's a winning combination to be progressive, but be pro-union. And since the Labour Party is mainly dead in Scotland, we can become the main challenger to the SNP. So I think we've got many opportunities. But let's move on. We've only got about 6 to 7 minutes. I would love to come to the last question that Anna Beria is asking about PR. But before we get to that, we've got Andrew, and then we've got Dudley. So both of you, unmute yourself. Well, first Andrew, then Dudley. Ask your questions. Try to keep it as short as possible, right, because there's a lot of interest in PR, and I'd love to get Anna in at the end. Off you go, Andrew.
Okay, Leila, if you look at the Conservative Party constitution, it says that they exist to perpetuate the objectives of the Conservative Party. They never say what it is, not in the constitution. If you look at Labour in clause 4, it says that they are a social democratic party and they ask the people to give them the right to govern. Now, we're a liberal democratic party and we have a constitution and we have the preamble and it's very distinctive. But the bottom line is that when you go out on the doorstep in the election, people do not understand what a Liberal Democrat is. They don't understand what is distinctive about the party. They don't understand why I joined. I don't want to see people enslaved by poverty, ignorance, and conformity. I want to live in a free and open society, etc., etc. We don't get that message across. Ed has disappeared into a couple of signature policies. You've got 2 or 3 signature policies, but I want to hear how you're going to sell Liberal Democrat values to the population over the next 2 to 4 years, how you're going to win in local elections in 2021, and how you're going to, as you say, deliver, 90 Lib Dem seats in 2024 and a government in 2029.
Thank you, Andrew.
That was 3.
Yeah, that's 3. So yeah, indeed. And actually, I would consider success as a leader if at the next election you knock on a door and someone can answer that question. Because that's what I discovered when I went door knocking after the last election, and I went all around, not London and the southeast, and all around, Labour facing, Tory facing, rural, urban. I picked up the same thing. People just don't really know what we are. And actually, if you had it in a nutshell, what is it? Well, it's freedom. And it's freedom to live in an open, tolerant society where you are the master of your own destiny, where you are invested in as an individual, and we trust you to make those decisions for yourself. But in order to be free to do that, you also need to be free from ignorance, poverty, and conformity. That sense of freedom, community, and the individual is what lies at our heart. And the reason why we are going to campaign our socks off for the local elections in 2021 is because that we don't just pay lip service to that. If you think about that as a core of liberalism, it also explains why we're Democrats, because everyone should have an equal vote and everyone should have an equal say. And that we believe that the best way of doing politics is in a consensus-driven approach and a collaborative approach. And that actually in its heart is what democracy is it not? But we also believe in community, which is why we believe in local government. And so what will I be doing concretely? Well, actually, I started my listening tour. But Andrew, I'm going to, at this point, say, unless we rebuild our brand, the brand that has by and large disappeared from the British psyche, then we are at a genuine crossroads where I worry for the future of our party. And so when I talk about renewal and revival, we need to start by accepting that we are getting it wrong. Whatever we've been doing, it's not working. And we need to change. And it starts actually by being quite deliberate about what we do. And it starts by listening. So my first year of my leadership, you can expect me traveling the country, whether it be, I hope Zoom by then is a thing of the past, but maybe not. Actually, I hope it's not entirely a thing of the past, because I do think it makes us more accessible to each other. So that's a good thing. But I want to go and talk to voters. I want to have that conversation with them. My job as leader is to listen and to connect with where people are now. And once I've identified what those connection points are, then we can bring them towards what liberal values means for them. So when I've chosen education, the environment, and the economy, that wasn't me flicking through a thesaurus under E and looking for things that matched. That was actually created from the conversations that I was having with voters in the period before COVID-19. And I'm not convinced that it is necessarily those three areas that we should be putting on a manifesto in 2024, because we need to remain nimble. We need to keep listening. And so that is where we start. And yes, I'm aiming big for our party, but let's start by rebuilding our foundations, because at the moment they are so rickety that unless we change what we are doing, I don't think that it is any exaggeration to say that I worry for the future of liberal democracy and a liberal Democrat party in this country. And we have to change that.
Well, Leila, what a passionate and wonderful answer. You can't read all the lovely things in the chat, but Nick Perry says, your answer on freedom brought me tears of joy. You better bloody win. That's what I hope too. And in fact, anybody who wants to support Leila, she's got her website, lots of stuff coming up. So I give you again her website, www.votelayla.org, and please, if you really bloody want Leila to win, then you need lots of volunteers, and please sign up to Leila's campaign. It is 9 o'clock now. I don't know how much you can still you feel still fit to talk.
One more last one. Let's do one more last one. And I actually think that if we don't talk about electoral reform, then what kind of Lib Dem meeting is this?
All right, okay, let's just get, I'm so sorry, Dudley, I hope you forgive us. Let's just hear from Anna Beria. Anna, are you still there? Anna? No, we can't talk about electoral reform.
That's fine.
Dudley, what about you then? You got the last question, Dudley, on cooperative mindset. Are you still there?
Yes, I am. Yes. Hello, Lady Vera. At a time when the world more and more needs to work together to solve international challenges, pandemics, environmental destruction, and notably climate change particularly, but the forces of nationalism and populism are fragmenting the world more and more. So how would you advocate that the UK should lead the world towards a more cooperative mindset, reversing the current trend?
What a fabulous question, Dudley, because whilst on the one hand it feels very up here, and I should say, you know, because of my upbringing and my experience growing up, I was very interested in geopolitics and the way that these big questions play out across the world. But the other side to my experience was that actually these things really matter. Because one of the first memories that I have was of military parades outside our house in Addis Ababa. And the reason they were happening was because there was a dictator, an authoritarian, who decided that he would much rather spend his money waging war on Eritrea than feeding his own people. And he was far more interested in his own ego than feeding and helping his own people. And I think it's moments like that growing up that made me realize that actually these big philosophical questions matter. They matter in lives, and they matter in humanity's ability to progress. And if you look at humanity over time, it has been liberals that have made those greatest leaps. And it's in moments like these, of great crises, where we have a choice about the kind of world that we end up in. And we don't just have the crisis of the pandemic. You're absolutely right to point out the crisis of climate change. And if we don't meet this crisis head on and make the case for how our liberal values are the only way that it's going to get solved, the people who pay are those who are the most vulnerable and those who are the most marginalized. And that's why we have to fight for it. And it is going to be a fight. And it's not just in our own country. And we're seeing it in Wales and Scotland, but we're also seeing it with the far right in England as well. We're seeing it abroad with, Brexit has, of course, been a massive blow. But even within other European nations, we are seeing the rise of these parties that want to be more isolationist, that feel that the way that you tackle these big things is actually to hunker down, is to get small, when actually our values are about openness and cooperation and is to be big. And actually that we are stronger when we work with others. And we need to fight for it. And it starts with our own country, but it starts by having that liberal revival. And it has to start here, and it has to start in America against Trump as well. And I have great hopes for what might happen in November. And it has to happen in Israel, Palestine, and it has to happen in Turkey. And we have to fight these people across the world. And if we don't do it from here, then where are we going to? And the very final thing I'll say is the other thing that I've recognized, and we are in a great privileged position, everybody, because people listen to Britain. People listen to us. When people watch the Houses of Parliament, we have influence over the mindset of other people. They pick what we say and they put it in international newspapers, and the influence of Britain in the world is diminished, make no mistake, but it's not gone away. And we have a moral part to play in making the case for those liberal values, not just at home, but also abroad. And the reason for that is because people's lives depend on it.
Leila, thank you, but you cannot get away because my good friend Anna has now unmuted herself, and she must ask a question on PR. There's so much interest about it, and of course we cannot finish a meeting without having talked about PR. Anna, you're ready now.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. Just very briefly, are you prepared to take up the challenge and push for PR, for real PR, not the ersatz PR that we fought for and lost 10 years ago? Are you ready?
Yes, we have to. We have to. And in fact, I would argue it needs to be one of the red lines that we would put in any kind of future agreement with, if there was ever a time when we got into the stage where we were able to influence a government in a serious way, that has to be the red line. Because what we've learned from the past is that this first part of the post system is broken. It means that people don't have equal votes. It means that people don't have equal power. It lies at the heart of what's wrong with our democracy in this country. And the reason we do it is not tactical. It's because it totally counters what we care about as liberals, which is about power to the individual. In the end, that's what it all comes down to. And there are parts of this country where, frankly, it almost doesn't matter who you vote for. You'll always end up with the same color rosette on whoever stands up at the podium. That has to be wrong. So yes, we need to deliver PR. And for what it's worth, there's all sorts of different versions of it. I'm a bit of an AV plus girl, but there's lots of different versions. And yes, it's something I would push for.
Leila, you've been wonderful, and you've gone over time, and it was such a stimulating evening that we could continue for another hour or two.
I agree.
But we all need to finish here. I want to say a huge thank you and echo what Nick said. You better bloody win. But we can all make a difference here and help. So please help Leila's campaign, www.votelayla.org. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening, a good weekend, and hopefully the rain is going to stop. It's been raining non-stop here. Thank you again, Leila. Thank you. Bye,
Take
bye,
care,
bye.
everybody. Lovely to see you. Thanks very much. Bye.